times the context that I'm dealing with this is young men who say, I want to get married, but I can't find, a good girl. I want to get a job. I want to be able to make money. I can't do that without, college, without tons of debt. I want to be able to start a family. And so they feel like they're in this just gigantic uphill battle, and they get frustrated and angry. Now, part of that is just the general process of maturing and growing and realizing that the quality of life your parents had is not what you're going to have in your 20s. But I do think it's a great opportunity for us to be able to just point at the problem and say, yes, it's real. How can we avoid making that same mistake?
You're listening to Faith in Action. I'm your host, Matthew Nowlin.
And I'm Sean Graham.
We lead Conservative Christians of Tennessee, and we are thankful you're listening to this show. Conservative Christians of Tennessee exists to analyze political policy and politicians in Tennessee and do it all from a conservative Christian worldview. We want to glorify God by helping you to glorify God, so please don't hesitate to send us any questions or comments via email. You can reach me directly by emailing Matthew at tnchristian.com.
Or Sean, SHAWN, at tnchristian.com.
And you can follow me on X. I'm at MNBookman. Today's show is sponsored in the West Tennessee area by the #1 lawn care company in the Mid-South, Herbie Systems. Summer's here, and without enough nutrients, your lawn becomes more susceptible to diseases and pests. To effectively keep weeds away from your lawn, trust the experts at Herbie Systems. Call 901-290-7774 today and let them kill your weeds. Again, that's 901-290-7774 and let them kill your weeds. Today's scripture is from 1 Kings chapter 10, verses 21 through 23. All King Solomon's drinking vessels were gold, and all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were pure gold. Not one was silver, for this was accounted as nothing in the days of Solomon. For the king had merchant ships at sea with the fleet of Hiram. Once every 3 years the merchant ships came, bringing gold, silver, ivory, apes, and monkeys. So King Solomon surpassed all the kings of the earth in riches and wisdom. Listeners, you're the reason we're here each week, and we're thankful for your time and the loyalty you show to Bot Radio, which is an amazing ministry. You're amazing, and we really want you to know how much we value you, and we know our audience skews a little bit older. I'm a millennial. Sean is an Xer. A lot of y'all are older than us, but you'll never hear us disparage anyone just for being old or young. Today, we want to take a moment, though, to show you a very real difference that has occurred in home purchases in your lifetime and in mine. Want to take you to a quote from a couple of years ago from Klaus Schwab. He was formerly of the World Economic Forum. And he said that one of the things that would be different about our economy by 2030 is, quote, we will own nothing and be happy, end quote. We all lived through the nightmare of the housing crash of 2008. That moment in American history is viewed very differently by millennials than it is for boomers or Gen Xers. Sean has talked about watching multiple families within sight of his front door simply walk away from their home in the middle of the night. Families abandoned the hope of getting out from the financial strain in 2009, and he never saw them again. Folks, that story was repeated all over Memphis, all over Nashville, all over America. The generation that followed was punished for bad mortgages they had nothing to do with. Younger families now are forced to put down a lot more equity just because of the price. Not a bigger percentage, but just a huge amount for, relatively speaking, to a young family to get into homes, amounts that their parents would have never even dreamed possible. And when all the homes went for cheap, the foreign corporations did a lot of buying, and now they're renting these homes at a premium that's more than the monthly note on houses was in 2008. The housing market is a mess. Liberals will tell you it's because of a 4 million house shortage, but that's not true. The University of Kansas has a recent study that says there are actually a surplus of homes on the market, and only 19 towns out of over 300 surveys said they have a shortage. But the same study did say, quote, the data shows that the majority of American markets have adequate supplies of housing available. Unfortunately, not enough of it is affordable, especially for low-income and very low-income families and individuals. Today, we want to talk across generations and talk with Pastor BJ Newman about biblical solutions that fly in the face of the effects of our government's bad public policy. That's currency and just overall financial policy, immigration, education. Look, the church must teach our families how to thrive in the face of wicked governmental policy. Our guest, BJ Newman, is an ordained Presbyterian minister. He was a local church pastor for several years and is presently involved in the work of a church planting. Prior to ministry, BJ worked as an intelligence analyst, a translator, and a high school English teacher. He has worked in Springfield, Ohio since 2015. You might remember our last episode with him. They're eating the dogs and cats. He lives in Xenia, Ohio with his wife and 4 children, where he enjoys hunting, fishing, coaching baseball, and reading old books, which I love because dead guys never disappoint you. Welcome to Faith in Action, Pastor BJ Newman.
Hey, thanks for inviting me, guys. I'm glad to be on.
You've really been such a good voice to listen to because you talk a lot about anthropology. We're at a PCA church, my wife and I and our family. We're not at a PCA church because it's a PCA church. We're at a PCA church because it was the only church in the town we live in that we could find that gets basic anthropology right. It doesn't have ghost elders. You know, it's a male-led church. And I was talking with the pastor. He said it was a happy carryover because the quote, the house has good bones. But you get anthropology right. And you said that anthropology is the issue of our day. And part of anthropology is families replacing themselves with more people from their bloodline and having a place to live. And I guess that's where we're going to talk. Tell us a little bit about your own housing missteps as you came of age, I think right around the 2008 housing crash.
Well, I love that you connect the question of anthropology to housing. It's important for us to recognize that learning what a human is and what a human is for and what it means to be made in the image of God connects to all areas of life. And so when I say that anthropology is the issue of the day, it ripples everywhere. And one of the things that every human innately really wants to do, there's an innate human drive, unless it is destroyed by sin or some sort of, effects outside of them, is they want to pair off, get married, and have kids. And the fact that we see so many people giving up on marriage, giving up on having children is just a sign that as a society, we are sick. If you do not have a next generation, you don't have a society. And right now, one of the bigger impediments to people trying to form families and have children and raise the next generation in a healthy way is economics. And I think the 3 big pillars of that is just having, homes that we can afford, the ability to, have an education and to be able to find jobs and to be able to create the ability to generate income. And I really learned the lesson about housing in 2006. Yeah. So I feel like in some way I had a foot in 2 different worlds. It was in 2006. The market was hot. Everybody was buying. Credit was easy. I lived in Virginia Beach with my wife, and we didn't have any kids at the time. And a condo came available in my neck of the woods. The price of the condo at the time was $150,000. I had no money down, and I somewhat foolishly, and by somewhat I mean completely foolishly, took on an 80-20 loan, which means I didn't put anything down except for closing costs. And the 80% loan was a 7% interest rate, and the 20% loan was an 11% interest rate. So I set myself up very poorly, and I didn't know what I was doing. I was just kind of flailing my way into it. We were able to borrow all this money. We had a reasonable monthly payment. So for a couple of years, it was really good. By 2008, we had about $15,000 in equity. So we were feeling pretty good. And then, did I mention it was 2008? And within a 6-month period, and the house was worth about $105,000. We were in a mess. At this point, my wife and I are trying to have kids. We want to grow a family. We do eventually have 2 children, one in 2008 and one in 2010. But by this point, we have the decision to go, okay, we think it's best in terms of our Christian values and in terms of our desire to keep our kids safe from some of the terrors of the public education system. So we decide to have my wife stay home, which means that she was working at a library at a local university. We lose that income. I was making $38,000 as a public school teacher, and that freezes. So here we are, wife, husband, 2 kids, an income of $38,000 a year, and a house that's upside down. We were in a mess. So I feel like I got to see a little bit of what the previous generation got to experience with housing, where it was like, go buy a house, wait 10 years, you'll make a lot of money. And I get to see on this side, like, if I am even able to get into the house, I find myself in a mess. And so deep sympathy for our kids today and being able to get into the housing market. And it's very difficult.
Yeah, and there are a lot of regulations as to how houses have to be built. A lot of regulations in a lot of towns that prevent the building of small houses, which is just crazy. If you really think about it, everybody likes to point out that houses that we buy are much bigger today than they were in the past. Starter homes are much bigger today. But in the past, you didn't have the government regulating the bottom end size of those houses the same way that they are now. So a lot of this is bad policy, everything from how the houses themselves are regulated. There's a lot of anger, BJ, from younger folks. So first of all, we need to honor our father and our mother. And just as an extension of that, it's natural that we would honor their father and their mother. It's generational. This is a biblical principle that's designed to teach us to have harmonious intergenerational relations. But there's been a lot of bad economic policy. The debt load that our country has entered into. My 5-year-old son has got something that he could legitimately be angry about. The currency manipulation, since we've gone off the gold standard, has just wiped the value of the dollar. And that was done intentionally to allow the government to devalue debt so that they could just endlessly finance whatever on the backs of the future. So there's some genuine things there to be angry about. Before we really talk about anything else, I'm not mad at my parents, but I'm frustrated with the older generations. To be frank with you, Pastor Newman, there are men that are younger than me and even my same age who are just 1,000 times more emotional about this than I am. I mean, they are raging, angry. They feel betrayed. And I worry actually where they could go. And I worry about some actual potential harm to the older generation at the hands of the younger generations.
Well, I certainly see it in my ministry as well. I have spent a lot of time with young men, particularly, who are, disenfranchised from their parents, angry at their parents. They feel like this previous generation sold them out in terms of the faith, the church. I mean, my goodness, the weakness of the church was really revealed in 2020 and 2021. So the anger that you're talking about is very real. But as a pastor, I really want us to honor what Scripture teaches about the family, which is the fifth commandment. We have to honor father and mother. And part of being able to repair some of that is to, first of all, just acknowledge that some of the younger generation are not crazy. They are up against it. And, a lot of the times the context that I'm dealing with this is young men who say, I want to get married, but I can't find, a good girl. I want to get a job. I want to be able to make money. I can't do that without, college, without tons of debt. I want to be able to start a family. And so they feel like they're in this just gigantic uphill battle, and they get frustrated and angry. Now, part of that is just the general process of maturing and growing and realizing that the quality of life your parents had is not what you're going to have in your 20s. But I do think it's a great opportunity for us to be able to just point at the problem and say, yes, it's real. How can we avoid making that same mistake? Now, as a local church pastor, I don't pretend that I have the ability to change government policy, the ability to change, corporate influence, because one of the real problems that I see in my town and in various other parts of where I live is that many of the homes that are being built are bought up by corporations that aren't part of the neighborhood. And when you get to that place where there's 40, 50, 60% of the homes that are rental instead of home owned, the values go down. Mm-hmm. And that just creates an even bigger problem, right? You end up with all of these government regulations, corporate ownership, and it just boxes out young potential families from forming. So as a pastor, I thought to myself, okay, what is the solution for this? What is the biblical response? And I think what we need to do is to double down on and rediscover the idea of intergenerational family support. We started the conversation with a question of anthropology. And one of the shifts that has happened, and we're living the effects of it, is that there's this subtle idea that the individual is sort of the foundation of American society. Biblically, that's just untrue. Biblically, our individual identity comes out of our family. We're given a name, we're given a genetic line, we're given a language, we're given, all sorts of duties. You are born with the duty to honor father and mother. You didn't choose any of that. It was just an obligation given to you because we are networked into a family. And I'm a good Presbyterian minister, so we like to talk about covenants. And the family is a covenant. When a husband and wife say, I do, they covenant together for life. The children that come from that Parents have obligations to those children. Children have obligations to their parents. And
That's
I'm convinced that one of the things that we can do is to just rediscover those obligations and duties and get after, doing well by our children.
One of the things that I've felt strongly about for a number of years now is the interjection of the government into the space between generations. And I'll give you two examples of that. The first example is the interjection of government into education. Education became a daycare system of sorts. The government had more awake hours with our children than parents did. And unfortunately, 30 minutes of really lackadaisical coloring every Sunday wasn't enough to overturn the 40-hour public school indoctrination. But that came between the natural affections between parents and children. So public schooling, government schooling did that. We had public schooling in this country long before we had governmental schooling. Secondly, Social Security obliterated the feeling of obligation that younger generations had to older generations, and it obliterated the familial affection and dependence, the natural order of things that was built into Scripture. There was a reason the firstborn child got a double portion of inheritance.
That's
because
right.
They were supposed to take care of their parents. But it obliterated that. And we like to make fun of welfare mamas for having the government as their sugar daddy. But the truth is we've just obliterated this in the most natural way possible, which is the active generation, the middle generation, caring for both its children and its parents. What are the obligations, though, of parents to their children? We can talk about these things that I have, or you can add to it. But in my mind, it's that their kids leave the home with a grounded faith, first and foremost. Secondly, they leave with good health, as good a health as possible, and they have good fitness and habits associated with that. In other words, mama and daddy, they're leaving as robust young men and women, and then a ramp into a career. Train a child the way they should go, and when they grow old, they will not depart from it. So I think they should have a ramp into a career. I can't think of anything else, but you are an analyst, so analyze this, please.
So I just want to double down and say yes and amen to the list that you just put out there. The faith, first and foremost, is the most important. And as a pastor, if you give your children nothing else, give them a solid faith in God, because that will transform everything else that they do.
Thank you, Mom.
Amen. That's exactly right. I have amazing parents. My father's with the Lord. My mom is still alive, and I love them to death, and I'm grateful to God for them. Well, let me say it this way. Everybody is going to be at different abilities in this regard. Some parents who have higher educations are going to be able to do better by their kids in the education department. Some people who are more physically fit are going to be able to do better by their kids in terms of healthy lifestyle and so forth. Financially, there's a scale. I always want to call it aspirational. Your goal should be to help move your children a little bit further towards godliness and excellence in these areas than you. You always want to figure out how to tier them up a little bit. So for instance, my dad barely graduated high school because he just was like a knucklehead that didn't really want to go. And my grandfather had to half beat him to death to make him finish high school. And my mom finished high school and had a little bit of college. And they said right out of the gate, you two are going to go to college. You two, me and my brother, will go to college. We are going to make sure you have an education. I was born in 1980. So at that time, that was a really key factor in moving up the socioeconomic ladder. And I, to this day, am super grateful for that. But to add to the list, I think the two things I would want to say, the first one is, aside from the faith, is a really important set of interpersonal skills, things like self-discipline, hard work, the ability to learn how to get along with people, because ultimately we don't really know what the future holds for our kids. So
That's
what
right.
we're trying to give them is not so much a pathway for how to get there, because like me, it was, here, go to college, get a good job, get married. And 2008 hits and everything gets thrown into a blender there. So I don't know what our kids are going to face. If 2020 taught us anything, it's that you got to be ready for anything. And the way you confront those kinds of things is by teaching them skills. How do you have the habit of worshiping on Sunday, the habit of gathering with family on Saturday nights or whenever your family gatherings are? What kind of holidays do you celebrate? The day-to-day things of learning how to read, learning how to stay physically fit, and improving yourself. The skill set, I think, is the most important.
Yeah.
The second thing I would want to encourage parents to give them is, again, it all is a matter of scale here, but to the best of your ability, give them a community of people outside of your family that are trustworthy and high confidence. Here's why. I have a 16-year-old son. He's a senior in high school. He's going to be graduating. I have a 14-year-old son who's in 9th grade. They're at the place now where sometimes they think dad's an idiot, and they're going to go ask men outside of their family, outside of their uncles and their cousins, what do you think? And I would love for them to come to Uncle Matt and to Uncle Sean and say, tell me about life. And you guys go, come here. Yeah, let me do that. Yeah. Simply reinforce the faith to them.
Yeah, we raise kids together. That is so important.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
But this isn't some weird "it takes a village" thing, by the way.
That's exactly what I was about to say. No, when they talked about it takes a village, what they meant is we're going to grow government and raise your babies.
That's a very important thing, because when I was looking to find out who's doing this right, who's actually doing this, almost everybody who's talking about this right now is talking about building a 15-minute city or a community together or a smart city. It's all uber urban focused. It's all about giving up the family togetherness and building these dense individualistic things. This is not about multi-generational at all. This is all about you be the best you and get it all now. There's no wealth legacy. There's no family focus to any of this. BJ, I'm shocked. After looking at and reading what you said, I looked it up, and I don't think the government's capable of handling this topic. I think for them to get into it, this gets into socialism. This is not a capitalistic endeavor. This is a biblical endeavor for building the family. And I think that we are afraid to address that as conservatives because, we don't do socialism. Well, this isn't socialism. This is biblical family structure, and we have to honor that.
Yeah.
There's a wickedness in the church right now that many Christians would hear what we're talking about, and they would correlate it. So they would correlate blessing their own children with socialism. They would say, nope, get out on your own, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And it's almost a taunting.
Yeah.
Many young men feel taunted by the older generations.
Well, whenever I talk about some practical steps with folks, I'll say things like, do your best to give the inheritance to their kids before you die, right? If I have, whether it's modest or large, an inheritance that I can give to my kids, I don't need to just plop, my nest egg into their bank account, but I can do things like, you have a child that's born. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to sow some seed money so that when they go to college or, a vocational program, when they get older, I can help fund some of that. And, wait a second, you're turning 18. Okay, you're going out the door. You're trying to start your life. Let me give you a little bit of money for retirement, or let me help you purchase a home, or let me buy some land for you, or whatever the family is capable of. The answer that I get back every single time is, well, you're going to spoil them. What if they're not ready for it? And I go, well, that was your job as parents, was to get them ready for this. If giving your son $2,000 or $3,000 to sow into some retirement funds or to pay for college or whatever, it's obviously more expensive than that today, but giving them any amount of money is going to hurt them, then let's go back to the beginning of this conversation and say, let's get those skills in place, right? Yeah. One of the things that I have told my kids over and over is, maybe I've had too much Dave Ramsey in my head, but I'm like, don't do debt. Debt is dumb, right? But the reality is, if they're going to be able to get a home, get a college education or some sort of job training, get into the real world, start a business, they just don't have the resources for that. And learning to do general labor work, like my son worked this summer as a general laborer, so he's drywalling and doing kitchens and stuff like that. He made pretty decent money for a kid his age. It's not enough to go out there. So things that you can do are like, if he wants to start a business and he needs $10,000 to get things off the ground, rather than going to some megacorp bank or something like that, and who knows, where he would get that money. Hey, come to me. We'll make an arrangement where it's like, hey, I'll give you this money. If the business takes off, pay me back. If the business is just enough for you to make a living, okay, good, great. Consider that a gift from Plummet. Come on back home. Let the family become that safety net. And then step that out into the community at large, a family of families where there's high trust, high confidence. This is where social welfare should be done. The government has no business funding social welfare because then it allows them to maintain their soul-destroying pathologies. Whereas if my son is, I'm going to stop him.
Yeah. Well, Sean has given me the signal that says we should wrap up. So, folks, that's going to do it for another episode of Faith in Action. It's a hard topic. Think about your relationship with the generations above and below you. Pray that the Lord will give you wisdom and try to be of help both ways, every generation to the other generation. It's a very Christian thing to do. And if you want to hear more on this or other topics from a Christian worldview, head on over to BotRadioNetwork.com and search for Faith in Action. There we have links to over 5 years of past shows, or you can search for Faith in Action on Apple Podcasts or YouTube. Anywhere you find us, you can hear a wide range of guests sharing their wisdom about current events that affect Tennessee and the entire nation. And remember, until next week, the best thing that I could say to you is a promise from the book of Exodus: the Lord shall reign forever and ever.